Hi, everyone. Good morning, evening, or afternoon from wherever you're joining us in the world from today. Welcome to another SpeakUp webinar. SpeakUp is a unique collaboration between KeyNote and SpunkGo, in which KeyNote directory members and alumni will share their experiences and expertise on various topics each month to ignite and inspire conversations that are meaningful and matter and bring communities together through SpunkGo. A little about KeyNote. KeyNote Women Speakers is the world's leading directory of female public speakers. Founded in Singapore in 2017, KeyNote is the nonprofit organization run entirely by volunteers. KeyNote aims to bring diversity to speaking stages around the world. They focus on diversity simply because it increases group intelligence. SpunkGo is an all-girls global organization that operates in 20 countries with over 5,000 members across the world. We hold regular LifeSkill webinars each month for young women across the various chapters by hosting successful women entrepreneurs and professionals in our webinars. This is the fifth and very prominent webinar in the SpeakUp series. Today's session is a commemoration of World Environment Day and is a fireside chat between two highly accomplished speakers from KeyNote, celebrated climate change activist Sorkin, and accomplished UN Youth Ambassador and SDGs advocate Simarna Singh. The theme for World Environment Day 2021 is ecosystem restoration, and we'll see the launch of the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. The UN Decade runs from 2021 to 2030, which is also the deadline for the Sustainable Development Goals and the timeline that scientists have identified as the last chance to prevent catastrophic climate change. Lauren and Simarna will share now how you can join #GenerationRestoration for the protection and revival of ecosystems all around the world for the benefit of people and nature, and how this generation can make peace with nature. About our speakers. First, we have Lauren Sorkin, a seasoned and passionate sustainability, climate change, and urban resilience expert. Lauren is co-founder and executive director at Resilience City Network, the world's leading urban resilience organization, representing members in over 100 cities and 47 countries worldwide. Her focus is on building the capacity of cities, businesses, communities, and individuals to respond to climate change and increase equity and well-being. Lauren holds a BA in International Relations from Tufts University and a Master's in Science in Environment and Development from London School of Economics. She is a certified holistic health counselor and a yoga instructor and a fluent speaker of both Spanish and Hebrew. A New Jersey native, she has worked in Belgium, Peru, the Philippines, Spain, Thailand, the UK, and Vietnam before settling in Singapore. With nearly 2 decades of experience in sustainable finance, nutrition, and international cooperation, Lauren believes in deep and lasting partnerships to drive change. About our second speaker, Simarna Singh. Simarna is a passionate sustainability entrepreneur, and she is actively involved in actioning the SDGs with a strong belief that the youth will make a difference and they will not stop until they're heard. As a co-CEO of Coco Veda, a Singapore social enterprise, her mission is to amplify and impact and bridge inequalities across all sectors of society with multiple stakeholder partnerships. Simarna is United Nations Global Compact Youth Ambassador, and her understanding, knowledge, and experience around sustainability have led her to share her learnings as a consultant with corporations. Simarna has been the sustainability consultant for the Singapore Business Council in UAE since August 2020. After spending almost a year consulting and advising a leading 5-star hospitality brand on their mandatory sustainable compliance for 7 properties. She is also selected by UPS and AMTC Academy as a mentor for the Asia Women Exporters Program for aspiring women entrepreneurs in their journey. Without further ado, I now hand the floor to Lauren.
Thank you so much, Nesha, for having me. I'm so thrilled to be here with this amazing group of women from around the world this afternoon from Singapore. And before I begin, I also want to congratulate you, Nesha, because as you were just telling me when we were getting ready for this webinar, this is the 1-year anniversary of SpunkGo. And that is incredible. So as we say, may you go from strength to strength. You're 5,000 strong in 20 countries now. So I can only imagine what the future will hold. But you and I share a commonality in that we know the importance of networks. And really, it's in times of trouble, our networks are what sustain us and what get us through. And it's through having these trusted connections that we can really make a difference. So I think it's absolutely wonderful that you started this initiative, and I'm really pleased to be speaking with you and all the wonderful women on this call today. So I'm going to start out with a couple of slides and a short video for you today. And then we'll have plenty of time to talk, Simarna and I, and then to take your questions later. And I really look forward to that part of the presentation. So let me begin. So there really couldn't be a more important time to be talking about environment and people and how we interact. And so as I begin, I really want to talk about why it is so important that we talk about environment and that we talk about cities and the environment together. So just a little bit about how I ended up on this journey. I was a young woman, like most of you, in a small town, actually, in New Jersey, in the United States, and very, very worried about climate change and environmental pollution. And so that's what I took up in my studies. That's what I took up in my activities with friends, with different organizations, and began to work as an advocate for environment and development through think tanks and also through action, through policy action, and found that it's really going to be up to us and people who are living in concentrated city centers who have the ability to make a change. So we're living right now in an urban moment. So more than 50% of the population of the globe lives in cities right now. And by 2050, it will be about 70%. Cities are what allow us to make change at scale. 70% of us living in cities is one thing. We also create 75% of global emissions, right? So our cities are this incredible combination of both challenge and opportunity. We also know that our cities, especially our coastal cities, and this is true no matter where you're living around the world, are the most at risk to climate change, storms, flood, and wherever we are, increasing temperatures are increasingly putting us at risk. Now, cities that build in and with nature, right, coming to the issue of environment, they are more sustainable because they support Earth's vital functions, which sustain us as humans. They also protect people with something that we call environment or ecosystem services. And really, that's what we're after. We need to, as a global population, understand, value, and invest in ecosystem services as we continue to thrive economically. So I'm going to show a short video. Actually, I think Netra is going to help me to show a short video on cities and multiple benefits.
Just want to check, can everybody see my screen?
Thank you, Netra. Okay, I'm going to go back to the slides. Hopefully you can see my screen again. Okay, great. So what does it mean to build resilience? What does it mean to invest in ecosystems and cities so that we as humans and nature are more resilient? So it helps to have a common definition for resilience. And the way we define resilience is that resilience is our way to survive, adapt, and grow, no matter what shock or chronic stress we face. And I want to break that down because sometimes people think that resilience is a very complicated or complex topic. But in fact, all of us in our everyday lives, we inherently understand what resilience is because we do it for ourselves. So our shocks are the things that happen to us unexpectedly. We walk out and there's a sudden thunderstorm, or unfortunately in a city's case, maybe there's a major earthquake or a terrorist attack, something that happens suddenly. Those are our shocks. At the same time, we know that at any given moment, cities, individuals, we're dealing with chronic stresses, right? And those can be things like ongoing or chronic diseases when we talk about the body. When we talk about cities, we can talk about things like aging infrastructure or inadequate infrastructure, informality, right? Our cities are growing too fast and the government and industry can't keep up with people's housing needs, their access to water and sanitation. These are stresses, right? Because they weaken the fabric of our cities, of the places we live. And similarly, our environment has these chronic stresses. And the biggest one is climate change, right? That is a chronic stress. Deforestation is a chronic stress, something that's going on in an ongoing way to our environment. So when we're building resilience, what we're doing is we're strengthening our systems over time and with specific investments in order to stabilize ourselves in the face of an uncertain future. And that's really the future that we have inherited. And I count myself in that group. I like to still as a borderline millennial, but it's a future that we're inheriting. So building resilience in both the ecosystem and in our cities, in our institutions, and in ourselves is very essential. Now, what is the opportunity and why do we talk about cities and the ecosystem in such a connected way? Cities are a place that concentrate population, as I mentioned, in the climate resilience place. And I'm going to show two examples of where cities are actually using nature, both to adapt to climate change and to mitigate it. So cities concentrate this opportunity to deal with climate risk, right? And actually to harness the investment that's needed to change the way that we plan and act in relation to our ecosystem. The second one, where cities are incredibly important, is circularity. So on the cover slide of the presentation, you probably saw a slide which had a plastic bottle on it. And as we know, 80% of plastics that end up in our oceans, in the environment, they are coming from our cities. And unfortunately, the majority of those plastics are coming from the region where I live and work in Asia Pacific. So more than 70% are actually coming from the cities in this region. So it's a major issue that all of us need to work on in terms of how we relate to materials, right? Looking at the whole life cycle of what we use and where consumers can change their behavior, and cities are absolutely integral in that. Okay, I'm going to go quickly to these last few cases, but before I do, I wanted to mention our membership. I just went a bit quickly there. We do have members in all of these continents, and hopefully in many of the cities where you're calling in from. And so in each and every one of those places, there are chief resilience officers and offices, and so ways to get involved in the future. So I wanted to make sure to mention that. And here's where I think it's important to think about networks. And again, I mentioned how important I think this network is. The more we look at what cities are facing around the world, the more we realize that in almost every case, if there is a city that's dealing with a specific challenge to their environment and to their economy and to their city and the people who are living there, it is almost assured that someone else in the network has dealt with that and can offer a leg up, can offer a solution that could be adapted for their local context. So as you see here, when we look at the environment and we look at what cities are looking at, The most common shocks and stresses that they're looking at are both the lack of affordable housing and ability to deal with climate change, and shocks like rainfall, flooding, and infrastructure failure from extreme heat. So what does that tell us? It tells us that the opportunity is there to solve those multiple challenges at the same time. And ecosystem restoration, doing that with nature, is our opportunity. So I want to give you two examples of where this is happening, because it's exciting, and both of these projects are extremely replicable and low cost. The first one is a green courtyard restoration for schools. So the city of Paris, when they came to the Resilient Cities Network many years ago, actually in 2014, they said, we have a problem. As the climate is changing, our schoolyards, which are paved with asphalt, with a black pavement, they can go up to 55 degrees Celsius during a heat wave. We have to shut down our schools. Moreover, what we know is that most Parisians do not live in walking distance to any kind of park. There's nowhere for kids to play. There's nowhere for people to meet and sit down and be in nature. And so what Paris decided to do as part of their Resilient Cities journey was to create a strategic plan that will invest in first 7 and then ultimately 800 resilient schoolyards, where they are greening schoolyards, creating cooling centers, and they're throwing those open on the weekends. So there you've got multiple benefits. You're planting trees, so you're restoring the ecosystem. You're creating places for water to be captured when it rains. You're creating shade, you're creating cooling, and you're keeping kids and communities safe. You're also, which is incredibly important, creating spaces for community cohesion, for people to get together, to talk to one another in different neighborhoods. And then the last project that I did want to show is a project about urban horticulture. And this is a project that's being replicated in many of our cities, but this particular screenshot is about what's happening in Chennai. And so the city of Chennai is actually now building about 300 rooftop schoolyard gardens, which serve as cooling centers. They serve as rainwater capture places, and they also provide nutritious midday meals for students in that school. So I am going to, because I'm getting close to time, leave it there, and I'm very happy to be turning over the screen and the microphone to Simarna, and look forward to speaking to you more after the presentation.
Hi, everybody. So I hope I'm firstly audible. Lovely to meet you all. So before I begin my 10 minutes, I'd firstly like to take a minute to thank the organizers of the event, so KeyNote Women, and of course, Binu for this opportunity. And most importantly, of course, SpunkGo for this fantastic platform to give us the opportunity to actually make an impact for the youth around the world. So to my fellow youth in the room today, I'm only 23 years old. I definitely relate to a lot of the challenges that all of you have been facing during the pandemic. At the same time, I think I recognize the opportunity that sustainable development has presented. So before I begin my presentation on ecosystem restoration, just a quick question. How many of you have actually heard this topic before attending our panel discussion? So, you can type it on the chat box, but how many of you have actually heard of ecosystem restoration? Okay, so if you haven't, that's absolutely fine. Okay, so a lot of you have not heard of it, no issues at all. So what we're going to do is during this presentation, we're actually going to go over a little bit on the ecosystem restoration concept, what has happened to the planet since the 1900s, explaining the linkages of course, the Sustainable Development Goals from a people, planet, and profit standpoint. And of course, I look forward to making sure that we as the next generation actually make a difference. So to really summarize what ecosystem restoration is, I mean, this is more the theoretical, concept. And I think I'll dive down into the practical side of things in my next couple of slides. But it's very important to understand that our ecosystem can be damaged, degraded, and destroyed. And most of it is due to human activity. So this is really, like I said, a very generic definition. My question to the youth in the room today is, are we doing enough for our environment? And a lot of you might be thinking, well, no, I don't think we're doing enough, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do. It is a very simple question, but I think it's very important to address this question and actually make an impact together. So, whilst I was doing research about this topic, I found articles dated back to the 2000s. And I'm thinking, whoa, 21 years have passed and we're still speaking about the same situation. And in fact, the situation has only amplified and got worse. So to put things into perspective, we actually need 350 million hectares of degraded terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems to help remove 13 to 26 gigatons of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. And this will actually help us achieve global warming below 2 degrees, achieve the Paris Agreement, and of course, accelerate climate change. So some of you must be thinking, I still don't get it. You've said a lot of things, but I don't understand what exactly this is. And that's absolutely fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to break this down further and explain what went wrong, where are we now, and what can we do to better amplify this change. So before I move on to my next slide, can one of you guess which year was the hottest temperature? So you can type it on the chat box as well. I'd love to hear what you think before I move on to my next slide. What year do you think was the hottest temperature? So I'll just give you a minute. Okay, Javeria, spot on. Really good job. Very, very fantastic, actually, really, really spot on. So the Earth's global temperature actually is tied with 2016. It has increased at an average of 0.08 degrees since 1880. Imagine this, in 1981, it has increased by twice that amount. So we're now on 0.18 degrees, okay? Now, 2020, we've reached above the average of 0.94 degrees. That's crazy. The amount of things that have happened since then. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this video so that you can actually see what has been going on. So you must be wondering, what exactly has gone wrong? Why exactly are we in this situation? So this slide, to be honest, summarizes parts of it. Of course, our Earth's land is under pressure. That is the most important thing to understand. So our demand for food has increased. We have shifted our diets, things like deforestation. We've been using more Earth's resources, and that is exactly why we're in this situation at this point in time. So I'll move on to a more practical scenario. Okay, it is reported by the WMO that there is a 1/5 chance of exceeding the 1.5 degrees by 2024. So the question is, are we going to meet the Paris Agreement? Will we be able to actually showcase this reporting, by 2024? A lot of you might be thinking, no, we definitely can't achieve the Paris Agreement at this rate. So let me show you the graph on the right. So the graph on the right actually indicates that human population has definitely increased over the last couple of years. At the same time, there's a correlation between human population and the global mean temperature. Let's not go back too far, let's go back 100 years ago. And you can see that, let's say approximately, give or take, the population was 2 billion. We have grown 3 times more since. So obviously, if we have grown 3 times more, we're bound to use more resources, to live, to breathe, to eat. But the thing is, the earth can't sustain our needs. And that's probably why we're in such a situation. It's also one of the reasons why some countries are looking at exploring and building into Mars, for those who know. So here's another alarming statistic. By 2100, we're going to reach 15.6 billion at the highest capacity. Imagine now we can't sustain for our future generation, and here we are thinking that we have to actually rapidly build up. So what is important is we have to make sure that we don't consume as much, we don't build as much, and we have more policy intervention. So for example, the International Energy Agency actually announced that no fossil fuel projects should be approved, which means that we can actually help, accelerate the net zero greenhouse gases and achieve that by 2050. So we need more policy, we need more political leaders to take action as well. And hopefully that will be showcased at COP26. So all of that is great, but has this actually affected the Sustainable Development Goals? In one answer, yes. So for those who don't know, the SDGs is an interlinked framework. And it basically focuses on the fact that people, planet, the profit, peace, and of course, in partnerships, we make sure that no one is left behind. With that said, I think all of us agree that the pandemic has left so many people behind. And 2 countries that I can think of on the top of my head would be India and Africa. So in many developing countries, youth aged 15 to 25 is projected to grow from 207 million to 336 million by 2050. That's a lot of youth, in countries, and in countries like Africa, 50% of it is expected to be youth. Similarly, in countries like India. At the same time, if we are the next generation, why haven't we been upskilled and trained to understand sustainability holistically? I think it is evident that universities and schools have not prepared us for the future. For example, some countries don't even have access to Wi-Fi. So how are kids supposed to study during this difficult, challenging period? So, yes, we are a generation that has opportunities, but we are also a generation that needs support. Ecosystem restoration is great on a large scale because, of course, we're making sure that we protect biodiversity for future generations. So what can we do? You must be wondering, of course, what can we better do? To really answer this question, I will obviously go over this during the panel, but to give you a quick glimpse of the future opportunities, of course, investing in clean energy. So we need annual additions of 630 gigawatts of solar and 390 gigawatts of wind power by 2030. We need electrical vehicles, so 65% of the global fleet by 2030 and 100% by 2050. And finally, we need to urgently retrofit homes, buildings, and make them more energy efficient. So I'd like to conclude my presentation by one thing. This is the final countdown. My panel is not about sharing all of these facts, and I think Lauren will also bring in, a very practical aspect to whatever we've shared theoretically. We are a generation that can act, and I look forward to answering all your questions. I'd just like to conclude by playing one video. And of course, I look forward to, all of your questions.
What is the Paris Agreement? The Paris Agreement is a legally binding international treaty on climate change to limit global warming to well below 2, preferably to 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. This requires economic and social transformation to face the climate challenges now and moving into the future based on the best available science. The Paris Agreement works on a 5-year cycle of increasingly ambitious climate action. By 2020, countries communicate their plans, known as nationally determined contributions. Countries communicate actions they will take to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions in order to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement. Countries also communicate actions they will take to build resilience to adapt to the impacts of rising temperatures. This may include information on adaptation and finance flows. The Paris Agreement also provides a framework for financial, technical, and capacity building support to those countries who need it. Starting in 2024, countries report transparently on actions taken. Collective progress under the Paris Agreement will be assessed through a global stocktake. This will lead to recommendations for countries to set more ambitious plans in the next round.
Thank you so much, and I'll pass on the floor to the panel to commence.
Fantastic. Simarna, that was a great master class in a 15 minutes slot, I think, for everyone to give you a quick 101 on ecosystem restoration, and ending with the Paris Agreement, I think is very poignant. I think you also made great use of video, and related to that and kind of the references that you made today, one of the questions that I have for you is, what are the resources that are available today? When I look around, I'm constantly impressed by the number of resources that are now available to youth who want to make a difference. Where are your go-to places, and what would you recommend for our listeners on the call today?
Sure. Thank you so much for the question, Lauren. I'm actually going to split this question into 2 sections. So what the resources are, and also what the opportunities are. So for the youth, we're extremely fortunate to have, information readily available at our fingertips, be it on social media, of course, be it on Google. And so we have, opportunities to raise awareness instantly. So right after this, in the chat box, I'm actually going to share some resources with all of you, predominantly focused on sustainability. So a sustainable knowledge platform, a little bit on tech and fast tracking the SDGs, a course that you can actually, enroll into on tech for good in SDGs. And finally, of course, a little bit on climate change. And if you have any more specific queries, I'm happy to, of course, answer those more specifically. From an opportunities standpoint, I'd just like to take a minute to explain this a little bit. If we speak about the existing situation that we're in because of COVID, there's been a sudden increase in demand for green jobs in the workforce. Even though a lot of jobs in other industries are actually disappearing, we recognize that there's so many opportunities for us. So if you are a company that is already, switching towards the digital economy, aligning through the SDGs, hiring, people like the chief sustainability officers, this gives immediate employment, for the youth. And this is an opportunity that the youth can immediately, run with. But in order to, of course, do that, you have to know that, we have to be passionate. So a lot of you have asked questions on the chat box. This is all great, but how exactly can I better, advocate for this? People are going to make fun of me and this and that. And I'll definitely answer that in the Q&A later on. But you have to have passion. You better have to have, of course, skills and exposure. I'll just give you a quick example. The Minister of Sustainability and Environment in Singapore, Her Excellency Minister Grace Fu, is super passionate about sustainability. She's built a policy agenda that focuses on different pillars. So city in nature, sustainable living, energy reset, the green economy, and finally what Lauren touched on, the resilient future side of things as well. And this is actually cut across so many different industries. So this brings in our involvement as youth. If we have passion, we have a policy, we can implement that policy, we can immediately have job opportunities, we can upskill ourselves, and finally we can grow. So what I'll do is I'll share the links now in the chat box. So thank you for your question, Lauren. Just to ask you a question, in the backdrop of the pandemic, how can youth actually, help put the planet's health first? What would you say about this?
It's a great question, Simarna. I think this relates both to what youth can do for where they live, as well as what you can do personally. And so I'll speak to both of them. And as you mentioned, while professionally I work with cities during the day, I do a lot of work on holistic health in my kind of personal time. And I think that youth have the ability to break down a lot of the non-conventional barriers, I would say, that are there. And I think maybe when our colleague who was paying tribute to kind of the haters or the naysayers, if you were, is talking about folks who would respond to environmental activism in a certain way. Look, environmental activism isn't a sideline anymore, right? It is mainstream. And so reinforcing that both in our circles as well as with ourselves, I think is extremely important. When it comes to what we can do, a lot of us are staying at home. A lot of us are trying to be there for family members. We can make really sustainable choices with what we eat and also what we prepare for our friends and family. Looking at more plant-based diets is a really important way to prevent deforestation. And then actually getting involved, I think there are a number of opportunities for that. And as we are seeing with the COVID recovery, we're looking at recovery projects that build resilience, that are green and that are equitable. And this is a call out that is coming from many different places. It's coming from city governments, it's coming from national governments, it's coming from finance increasingly. So it should also be coming from youth. And I get very excited when I see groups like the Sunrise Movement who are coming together and advocating for green jobs for youth and for better training. So I think that those are a number of the different ways that youth can stand up and get involved. And the last thing I'll say about that is to really use this time to localize and understand the context of the ecosystem around you, right? Local knowledge is paramount in ecosystem restoration. So if you have in your community those who know a lot about the ecosystem, whether those are teachers or friends or family, I think taking this time to understand where within your particular local context there are opportunities to regenerate natural environments, right? To do gardening, right? And raise vegetables, and like the urban horticulture program in Chennai, right? Have food that is healthy and available and homegrown. We've seen tremendous upscaling of that kind of work, whether it's in Asia or in Latin America, and increasingly in our African cities as well. So I think there are a number of really exciting ways. I think I would come back to also, Simarna, something you said. What is the action pathway that makes you excited, right? There are a number of them. Is it food? Is it about green jobs, right? Is it about, tech? I was introduced to a firm just a couple of days ago that's using drones to do reforestation, right? They're kind of, it's incredibly cool in sci-fi, but they're kind of flying drones and shooting down trees into places that are difficult to access. I mean, wherever your passion is, get out there, understand the local challenge, and take action. So I think we're very aligned on that. So a question back to you are about those everyday changes that youth can make. What is it that we can do even if we have limited resources, for example?
Yeah, no, thank you so much for your question, Lauren. I think there's many ways we can get involved as youth. The first one, of course, social media posting. I know that it is maybe not as exciting initially to do it on your feed, but even sharing it on your stories or posting on LinkedIn, this actually gives you very quick visibility and knowledge as well. I think the second thing, planting trees, I mean, Lauren, you mentioned this as well in your presentation. I think that is definitely a good step. I think because of our depleting soil, damaged marine ecosystems, exploitation, wastage is, actually very, very important, and our natural resources is at risk. So reducing food wastage, for example, either when you're going out, taking a lunchbox with you and actually taking your food back, or if, for example, you have leftover a salad, for lunch, you can actually rework that dish and make something for dinner. I mean, it doesn't have to go in the bin. And I think food wastage is a very, very big problem in a lot of, cities, countries as well. You can always opt, like you said, for more local ingredients, plant-based diets, grow your own food. I think for the youth, who are still studying in schools and universities, you can start your own club. I think that would be great. I'm sure you're not the only one who's, very interested in sustainability. There will be people along with you as well. Things like water conservation. If for example, you're showering, washing your hands, of course, be concerned about that as well. Then, of course, my final point, it's not just about encouraging one another or yourselves. It's also about encouraging corporates and governments as well. So, for example, this sounds all very easy, but if you look at it on a larger scale, like a hotel, imagine, how much water they can be wasting, or how much energy they actually waste. And things like building management systems are obviously now being introduced, and they're actually doing things like gray water recycling. But as the youth, we actually have a voice to make a change. So I'll just give, a quick example. In the Middle East, in the UAE, we have something that called the Youth Circle. So where a bunch of youth actually sit together along with the minister. So we had the opportunity to meet with the minister back then, His Excellency Dr. Thani, who was the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. And he actually asked us to give feedback, on things that we felt were lacking in the circular economy, and how can we actually better drive that. And if the minister is actually directly taking this feedback from the youth and actually making changes, imagine how important your voice is. And he actually even conducted a workshop in collaboration with PepsiCo. And Pepsi was actually sharing, how they're focusing more on a circular economy. What, waste management practices are they taking in? So involving the youth, the government, and of course, the corporates is super important in one place. So that's what I would say, to be honest, Lauren. Just to bounce a question, back to you. I mean, I've said a little bit about the youth side of things, but, how important is, parents or elderly involvement in driving this change?
I think it's tremendously important. I kind of vote with my feet or vote with my chairs in my house. I mean, I've been dragging my daughters along to presentations and to eco activities in the community for a very long time. And I think that adults in the room need to support the youth around them. If they're not eco activists themselves or really knowledgeable about it, that's okay, right? But I think taking the time to get to know more about the issues together can be incredibly empowering. And I think it takes me to a message that I really want to share with this audience, right? I think environmental action and ecosystem restoration, it touches everyone, right? It's about finding that right story and that right message that connects that person who seemingly isn't connected to the issue back to it. So is it that that person really loves sport and doesn't understand that as temperatures continue to rise, you won't be able to have outdoor sporting events, right? And is that going to click? And is that going to change the discussion for them? Is it someone who absolutely loves food, right? And can go and take a vegetarian cooking class with you? Is it someone who loves the beach and is really fed up with seeing plastics littering the shores? So I think it's really about engaging your friends, your family, with the right message for them. And I think that as, supporters and as enablers, as the current, I think, slightly older generation and parents, grandparents, friends, we really need to make that space for youth. I think we also need to offer our lessons openly, right? And make it look like it's not always so easy. There are going to be setbacks. But if we start to look at our failures and our setbacks as learning moments and not as crushing and not as disqualifying us from the next round, right? That is a much better way to look at it. So I think helping as that older generation youth to understand that, you know, is empowering, in particular when we're dealing with really big issues like climate, like ecosystem restoration. These are generational pieces of work, right? We're going to have to keep at this. And the Paris Agreement is a good example of that. These are 5-year increments, right? By the time, you know, we get to that final evaluation period, 2035 to 2040, I think, oh my gosh, I'm going to be 60. That's crazy. But, you know, for you and for many of those on the phone, you'll be in the driver's seat. So think about what is it that you want when you're in that driver's seat, right? And then getting that conversation going in the right ways with those around you. I am going to ask you a question, Simarna, again, in terms of those enablers, those enabling factors for your success. How would you describe them? I mean, at, you know, a ripe old age of 24, right? You're sitting there with an enterprise and with incredible experience. You know, as youth, how would you say, you know, your generation can learn from your example? And then, you know, we've heard about these 3 pathways that have come to us through, you know, the UN around ecosystem restoration. You've talked a little bit to them around social media, which I think was really powerful. Are there other ways you think youth can use those 3 pathways?
Sure. Thank you so much, Lauren. So I think this was a question that a lot of you had, you know, what exactly can I do? So to begin with, you know, maybe I'll share a little bit about, you know, what I've done in my career till now and give you a little bit of sense as to how you can, you know, obviously either follow the path or make your own path as well. So I didn't learn much about sustainability in school. Everything I've learned is honestly on the job and maybe through programs as well. So, you know, at 19, I actually obviously wanted to amplify my social enterprise, Veda, you know, and we actually decided that we wouldn't just focus on, you know, helping the farmer communities where our products actually are made, or the women communities who actually manufacture these products. So we give them employment. But we decided that, you know, education is lacking today. And this was about 4 years ago. People didn't know much about the SDGs or sustainability. So we actually organized, you know, panel discussions, we organized meetups, and they were very well attended. So we had speakers who came from many different backgrounds, different industries, individuals who even had not heard of sustainability, but were still speaking about it. So for example, we had individuals from the UN organizations. So we had the UNWTO, UNGC, UN Women. We had large government organizations take part in this as well. Skills Future, Expo 2020, the Dubai Municipality, healthcare organizations like Alzara, corporates like PwC, Microsoft, and we held this at universities like SB Jain and Microsoft. So SB Jain and Middlesex, apologies. So this is not name dropping, by the way. My intention to explain this is to really share the importance of actually building relations with all of these speakers, individuals. They have a very, very big role to play in my journey today. Because of their support, their advice, their knowledge, I think I am where I am because of them as well. So I learned 2 things by initiating these sessions, like I said. The first thing being knowledge, the second thing being networking at a very informal setting. And this is a very big missing piece in schools and universities today. I mean, Lauren, you brought this up in the beginning as well, that, you know, your network actually plays a very, very big role, especially during these challenging times. So I then went on to become a UN Global Compact Youth Ambassador and was selected by the UAE, you know, government to actually represent this delegation at the UN COP25, and also had the opportunity to attend a UNIDO conference in Russia. And this honestly gave me a lot of exposure to understand, you know, what is going on behind the scenes, you know, from a government and policy standpoint. But with that said, to the youth in the room today, it didn't come easy. You know, I had to work hard, you know, for whatever I have got till now, and I'm not even there yet. You know, there are so many more youth who are doing so much better work. I think that it's very important to understand that with passion and hard work, you can get where you want. And also I inbuilt this within my own model, you know, for my social enterprise. So I actually could see the links that are missing. So people look at social enterprises like charities, but actually you can do business for good and help the people and help the planet at the same time. I then, you know, consulted, you know, a chain of hotels, like I said, and actually helped them with, you know, energy dashboards, waste management dashboards as well, teaching them policies and also upskilling their teams. Then became, you know, a sustainability consultant for the Singapore Business Council. But to answer the question in a nutshell, I didn't do one thing, to be honest, Lauren. I did multiple things. You know, I got a lot of exposure and experience. I think that gave me a lot of opportunities. I enrolled for programs. I think social media was a very, very big role for me. I actually had the opportunity to then, you know, get visibility, you know, become a little bit of a speaker on the side as well. And if there's advice I have to give to the youth, it's try new things. You know, we don't know what we want in the future. I mean, I didn't know what I wanted at the age of 18, 19. I enrolled into university thinking, I mean, you know, let's just go with the flow and see what happens. But if you don't try, you know, different things, you will never know where to go. And the fact that all of you are here today is already one step forward to achieving sustainability. So attend more sessions like these and make an impact. Yeah, that's what I would say. Lauren, you know, just to swap around the questions a little bit and get back to you, you know, how would you say, you know, the youth can actually use these 3 pathways, you know, making smart choices, raising their voice and taking action?
Yeah, I think I touched on those quite a lot in the last responses, but I will reiterate some of those. I mean, making smart choices, I think, in terms of not only what we consume food-wise, but also the choices we make in terms of where we consume, right? Consuming locally, right? Going with local, especially in the context of recovery from COVID-19, local small and medium enterprises, fortifying those who are responsible, who are doing the right thing, you know, surrounding ourselves with those who are making the right choices is incredibly important. So that's on the decisions. And of course, going back to plant-based diets, I think the more that we do invest in our own health and well-being with local, seasonal, I want to emphasize those 2 things as well. It's not just plant-based, but it's local and seasonal foods that are really important. That's very important in terms of making choices. In terms of actually getting involved in ecosystem restoration action, this is something that all of us can do. Try to understand where are the places in our city or in the area around our cities that need a boost, right? Where are there places that need reforestation? Where are there places that might be littered that need to be cleaned up, and actually getting involved in those efforts? And the final part around raising our voices. Social media is a great way. There need to be more voices from emerging markets talking about what is at stake. And I really want to emphasize that, because it is amazing to see what has happened with Fridays for the Future, with Greta, with her network, and more people getting involved from different countries. We need more of that, not only about climate, but people who are deeply understanding and acting together around the way that we balance out the actions that we need to help people and nature together. So very specifically, here's what our community needs. Our community is at risk of flooding, or our community is at risk of heat. Here are nature-based solutions that we can implement to do that. And there are a number of fantastic resources out there. The UN is one of them, the World Wildlife Fund, the Nature Conservancy. You all probably are familiar with some of the environmental groups or resources in your own cities and at your own universities. If not, I think, you know, find them and get involved in that kind of action. I think speaking up on social media is important. I think it's also important to speak up in those local forums and be seen. So I think we're coming to the end, Simarna, of our exchange, and we're going to throw it open to the Q&A now.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Simarna and Lauren, for this fantastic panel. I think during this panel, the audience and me too have learned the urgency of ecosystem restoration. So I am opening up for Q&A. And the first question we have here, this might be a repetition, but how can we speak up for this? Because people make fun of us whenever we try to talk about the environment and climate change, and most people don't know about this. So how do we inform them and speak up for it?
Yeah, I think this is a really important one. And I think don't feel like you're alone here. Take those folks that you care about who are not understanding this issue and find that message that resonates with them. I think number one, either bring them to a place that resonates, whether that's the beach, whether that's the forest, whether that's the kitchen, whether that's the sporting field, and share that message and share your intentions about it. I think also there is amazing conventional media around there. When I was in your shoes, everyone was talking about The Inconvenient Truth, which was a movie about a PowerPoint presentation from a vice president of the United States. So it was good, it's powerful, it was full of information, but in terms of Hollywood, quality content, it wasn't there. There are now so many different series that people can access, whether it's on YouTube, Netflix, mainstream media like the BBC. There are so many different messages where you can access this conversation. So I think, we could certainly share a list of those kind of mainstream programs, and you don't have to be an environmentalist to relate to them. You sit down and you can understand the potential of the challenge. I also think that working with influencers is very important on this, right? You don't have to take my word for it, but guess what? One of Indonesia's most popular, pop bands came out and put pressure on Tokopedia, which if you're not working or living in this region, Tokopedia is kind of like the Amazon or the Alibaba or the Lazada, the big online internet purchasing platform for Indonesia, a country, right, of 300 million people. So, that group came out, right, as advocates, and that changed things. We had another case of a K-pop star who ended up mobilizing 1 million trees being planted along mangroves, which is incredible for ecosystem restoration and fighting climate change. So I think identifying those influencers that get it, and networking and working through them is another really powerful way to message and raise our voices to advocate for these issues. Simarna, other thoughts from you?
Yeah, and to be honest, I've been in a very similar situation. For anybody who's asked this question, my friends actually did make fun of me. I think they once or twice used to tell me, "Oh, you're all about sustainability. It's a bit overdone. Can you stop talking about it?" And that's okay. But you have to think as a youth, are they going to rule your life in a year or 2 years time or 3 years time? If they're not going to, and they're not important, or if you have the opportunity to make a career out of this and you're passionate about it, who are they to tell you what to do? That would be my personal advice, is walk past it. Everybody's different, everybody has their own set of passions. So I mean, if somebody else is speaking about something they're passionate about, it's absolutely fine. So just walk over it and be proud of what you stand for. It honestly doesn't matter, and you'll definitely strive and shine in the future. So that's what I would say.
I think from both our speakers, that is definitely great advice, and I hope that answers the question. The next question is, I think political leaders need to seriously think about climate change now, but how can we as individuals play our part?
Simarna, I don't know if you want to take this, otherwise I can start. As individuals, it really does start with a commitment and a first step. So what is it that in your life you feel ready to commit to? Is it a change in terms of consumption? Is it getting involved in a specific project and aggregating? Simarna, I think your story of kind of building up the environmental portfolio of your life resonates so much with me. as well, because in the early days of my career, I did consulting and research. I helped firms with their ISO 14001, it wasn't in that time, which is an environmental standard to reduce waste and account for greenhouse gas emissions. And so I think it's finding that initial project and then adding on, right? Finding the things in your own local environment and in your life that you're most interested in. The food space has a lot of room for growth and innovation, natural products, right? Simarna, you're an expert in that. Actual reforestation and biodiversity conservation, right? If you love to be outdoors, if you love to be involved in actually taking care of the nature in the places where you live. So I think finding those steps and then sticking to them is really important. And I also think finding and surrounding yourself with those supportive people. Simarna, you gave a very important message just now. Those people who might be doubting you, right? Finding for every one of those someone else who is supportive. And maybe they aren't there next to you. Maybe there's someone through SpunkGo or someone through your network online, but finding someone who is your thought partner in this, I think, is extremely important. Very early in my career, I was able to find kind of my thought partner in this journey, and her name is Danielle. She runs an organization called Food Tank, but you can find it at Food Tank. It's a food think tank that's global, and she does a lot of work in this space. And so it's important to find those people and then share your goals, right? And help each other brainstorm, help each other through those tough spots as well.
To be honest, Lauren covered, a lot of the points that I was going to share, and I did touch on a few of them, of course, in the discussion. So, for example, things like I said, planting trees, supporting communities with, sustainable products, or, and I think Lauren mentioned this about food wastage as well. But I think the one thing that is super important at this point in time is maybe education. I mean, a lot of you mentioned that you actually didn't know about this topic before entering this, discussion. And I think that there are so many other youth who are facing, similar issues. But if they don't know, and maybe it could be a small club, or it could be sharing awareness, like I said, through social media, so you can get a wider audience, or it could be, asking your lecturers to offer, another course, and you can actually pitch that maybe as well. But I think that if you do that, maybe the awareness will rise, and then there will be a sudden increase in our involvement and our action. That's what I would say, to answer the immediate, climate change agenda.
I definitely agree. Coming together as a community could implement change in a bigger way. Our question here is, do we perceive the efforts of the youth holistically as a solution in ecosystem restoration?
Do we perceive youth efforts as a solution holistically? I don't know, is the speaker or the person who posed the question able to maybe unmute or to explain a little bit more what the question is? I like the direction it's going in, because it's talking about holistic action, but I'm not quite sure how to answer.
Whoever had this question, if you can unmute and maybe expand on it if you want. Or type in the chat, that's okay too.
Maybe we can take the next question while they get ready with that.
All right then, so the next question here is, how can we start a climate change campaign?
So I would say there are a couple of choices. There are a number of global groups like Fridays for the Future who have climate campaigns that you can sign up and be a part of, or starting your own. I think it depends where you are and what the objectives are. So I think if your objective is to reach out to local government, you might want to work with those who are influencing local government or creating a kind of coalition in a school, right? In your school, a club, I think, like as Simarna said, was a good suggestion in how to build a critical mass and have folks join you in that effort. I think if you're looking at doing something globally or with more media, there are some resources online that are very useful from those forums. And I guess I would also come back to something that Simarna said, which is on education. I think a lot of the platforms that are out there have really good materials that are fodder for campaigns that are actually very specific to places. So if you go on something like the NOAA site or going on something like the UN site around climate, you can actually find resources for different countries, for different jurisdictions that give you that kind of information that can help you to start and set the objectives for that campaign. That's what I would recommend. And Simarna, I don't know if you have some other words of wisdom to add to that.
Sure. I'll just share a little bit about a campaign that maybe I was trying to do. It's not necessarily for climate change, but I'll just give an example of what we were trying to do. So we were actually trying to create awareness on, women and youth in India who are forced into child marriages at a very young age because they don't have the education or the means. And I think that in order to raise awareness about a topic like this, you need a message. So if you're creating a campaign, what is the end goal that you're trying to present? Is it just a campaign to just shout out or raise awareness, or is there an impact or somebody that you're actually contributing towards at the end? So in this case, I wanted to help the women, in India. And so I think that if you have, diverse people, somebody from the corporate, somebody maybe from government, youth, obviously, I think if you have different people speaking a little bit of information, I think that would be great. I've seen some really cool videos on the UN about, youth and women actually dancing and fighting for change, but it's catchy and engaging. And I think campaigns always need to have that messaging. It needs to be fun and, just vibrant, because otherwise people don't understand the message. I think it's important when you create a campaign to define your target audience as well. Who exactly are you trying to reach this to? And it could be that you share these links via email to people that you want to connect with. So if you're looking at it from a strategic standpoint, sharing it on LinkedIn, I think that there are many other ways to define a campaign, but I would go beyond just creating a campaign. I would go as to what exactly do you want to impact with that campaign. That's what I would say.
Definitely, those are all very helpful tips in creating a moving and persuasive campaign. Our next question here is, how can the youth work collectively to spread more awareness on environmental issues? And how do you go about owning to the fact that most people won't pay attention to this?
I think, to be honest, we've somewhat answered this question, in the previous ones. So I don't know if there's another question, but of course, if you want to add on, but really, like, just to summarize again, to own it, of course, you need to make sure that you're confident and excited about it, to raise awareness. It doesn't just have to be environmental issues. So I think that's the one thing that I want to raise awareness on, because this sustainable development goals actually affect the people, the planet, as well, and the economy. And so you can always bring awareness, with regard to how exactly is sustainability affecting our economy. I think that is something that a lot of businesses are now starting to understand. I think that if a businessman, for example, doesn't want to implement sustainability, you can always put the dollar and cent value in front of them as well. That's what I would say. Try to measure the impact that you're making with the end dollar and cent. So I more or less have covered these, questions in my previous statement. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. I think having a group, right, and having power in numbers is important. So perhaps if you have that club, or if you have a group of consumers around a product, I think it depends what you're trying to influence. But I think there are lots of ways to do that, and to do that very well. Again, I think it's hard because sometimes when we're working in an international perspective or in different countries, it does seem like things are becoming more mainstream. And then when you take it down locally in your city, maybe it does seem like an extremely uphill battle, and people just are so taxed by what's happening with COVID that they can't think about sustainability, right? That it's getting pressed away again. And so I just want to say, I think those are legitimate concerns, and it comes back to trying to build back better, right? To bring that messaging of change and the possibility of change and the importance of it back to now. And so doing that in a way that is, you know, stronger is possible when you bring messages together. And maybe that relates to the holistic question, which I think we didn't answer because it wasn't quite clear, but you don't have to necessarily go at ecosystem restoration alone. And I want to make that point, because when we do resilience work is purposefully holistic and it's purposefully broad, because we know that with single investments, we have to deliver multiple benefits. So that's what I would say in terms of, you know, really trying to change the tide there with those more difficult cases. You know, if someone doesn't think that saving energy is important because of climate change, they might think it's important because it saves them money. Right? If they change all of the light bulbs in their place to LEDs, for example, which is a very low hanging fruit, as we say in the sustainability space, then that's going to really help. If you're building, right, a new housing development, and between your housing development and the set of shops across the way, there's no tree cover, right? Then when it's hot, people won't want to walk there, and your property value will be less. Right? So you can actually find these kinds of interventions, whether it's tree planting, whether it's rooftop gardening, that have multiple benefits. And so I would say that that's a place where you can really strive to find those values and be creative. I think that's a value that youth have that, you know, as we get into kind of fixed either sectors or careers, people have less of. And so I think being creative and finding ways to bring those benefits together and then find innovative solutions can be incredibly powerful. So get some other minds in the room, brainstorm about how you can achieve those multiple benefits together.
Netra, I'd just like to share just one point when Lauren was speaking that I just also wanted to explain. You know, the Sustainable Development Goals as a framework as well, you don't need to pick one goal to contribute to. So for example, a lot of you are asking about climate change. You know, each one, like, you know, I tried to explain is that they're all interlinked. So for example, if you're contributing towards gender equality, that automatically reduces inequalities, you know, and that actually gives you opportunities for decent work and economic growth. So in a way, each one actually makes an impact that reduces, you know, the poverty in a specific country or continent as well. So just think about it that way, that whatever impact you're making, they're all interlinked somehow or another. That's the only like comment that I wanted to make.
Definitely, and I think the advice that was given completely relates to the question at hand. This is a question for both of you from the audience. And how did you get into sustainability, and how could the audience get into a career in sustainability?
Sure, I think I'll share that from my perspective first. So I actually, you know, was really passionate always about making a difference. You know, one of the things that I did back when I was 15 was to actually attend the Model United Nations conferences. I actually really loved doing those debates and actually improved my public speaking tremendously, even though it was a bit overwhelming in the beginning. But there's a lot that you learn. I think, of course, I to be honest, inbuilt, you know, sustainability within my business model. You know, I thought that if, for example, and I'll just give this as a practical experience so you guys can maybe understand a little bit. Most companies actually add on sustainability as the last element. What we did is we actually started it from the beginning itself. So for example, if you employ more women, and you make more products and the volume increases, then obviously that gives job employment to them. And that automatically resonates back to the pharma cooperatives because we get the raw produce from them. So we're impacting jobs at many, many angles. For example, we're giving traineeships to youth as well for 3 to 6 months, and we're impacting them as well to actually understand the SDGs, a little bit as well about the digital economy, because a lot of the work we do is also on e-commerce. I think that to answer the question, really, it's really about the passion and your calling. You know, I mean, I actually did not plan sustainability. I did a holistic business degree and actually ventured out into hospitality. But I think with all the exposure and experience that I received, and around that time, the SDGs was actually launched when I did my meetup sessions. I thought that it was really, really interesting and definitely an area that I would really particularly enjoy. So that's a little bit about me. And, you know, I'm happy to connect with all the youth who are, you know, looking for other opportunities or who are interested in actually venturing into sustainability. You know, I'm happy to see how I can support you guys in offering traineeships or internships so that you can better learn it on the job. That's really how I actually advanced and grew. So that's a little bit from me. I mean, Lauren, I'm sure you have, you know, something to share as well.
And similarly, Simarna, I've been passionate about environment and making an impact for a very long time, and it really was the thing that I wanted to do from the start. And so if that's what you're feeling and that's what you'd like to do, I think there are a number of things that you can do. I think taking up internships is a wonderful suggestion that Simarna made. I think finding those right subjects to study is important, right? And there are more opportunities to have an impact in sustainability than there have ever been before. So if your passion, again, is nature, I think getting into the study of, right, the ecology, botany, and looking at the kinds of plants that can be sustainable, right, that can help with drought tolerance, salt tolerance, and the challenges that we face as humanity in terms of a changing climate are excellent opportunities. Likewise, if you love math and you love numbers, there is now a whole opportunity in sustainable businesses like Simarna has done, and also in banking, right? People are coming up with green bonds, which are just on their infancy of being able to provide the kinds of funds and credit that will be fueling the change that the world needs, and in these big sectors like agriculture and energy and the building space. So I think there are a number of opportunities. So I think getting out there and starting to study those subjects that are interesting to you, reading up on the different kinds of careers that are out there, is more possible than before. Using, use LinkedIn as a good guide, right? Look at those careers of folks who inspire you and work backwards, and also find those courses that are interesting to you. Simarna, you mentioned Model UN. I think, things like science clubs, environmental action clubs, all of those are really fantastic ways to get involved.
I definitely agree with that. Passion is a very important part of this. Our next question is, how do we make the government more aware, and how can the government take action against this?
It's probably a good question for, go ahead.
Go ahead,
It's
Laura.
probably a good question for me because I work so much with local governments, and that's what we do day in, day out. And I think the best way to make local governments aware as constituents is showing up, right? Showing up at council meetings, at the government meetings, making phone calls, right? Being present on social media. Most of our candidates, most of our politicians now have, Twitter handles, Facebook pages, etc. So making your voice heard, asking questions about sustainability is extremely, extremely important. And then depending on where you live and how accessible it is, you may be able to work with enablers around you, right? If those are people in your network, if you're not of voting age, right? To actually start political action committees that influence. Another way, and perhaps a way that they would welcome, depending on where you are, is actually to volunteer your services, right? Many, many, many local governments are not taking enough action, not because they don't want to, but because they don't have enough capacity. right? I think many of our local governments, even many of our national governments, have been so overwhelmed by the task of responding to COVID and trying to restart the economy. And in many ways, they're trying to do that in a greener way. But there's a lot of room for doing that better, and having young, smart people who are willing to ask questions, go and run with research projects, right? Do community engagement work is incredibly attractive. I can tell you that working with cities in 47 countries, very, very rarely have I ever heard any of our resilience offices turning away those who want to help with this agenda, right? There are so many projects out there where you can begin to do this work. So, you know, if you're living in one of the cities in our network, for example, and you want to engage with projects on resilience, right, there are a number of opportunities to do that. In fact, many of the projects our resilience officers are working at are aimed at youth, right, and getting youth involved and creating youth employment. So I would say, if your local government is for some reason resistant, raise your voice, right? Use that pathway and try to hold those local officials accountable. If you think you have a receptive local government, and in many cases, I would say, try that, explore that, because a lot of local governments would like to do more, and getting involved can actually strengthen that system, right? So much talent doesn't go to the public sector for many reasons that we understand. People want to bring their skills, or they have an innovative idea and they want to take it into business, and that's amazing. At the same time, we need bright, wonderful, inspired, and moral leaders in government. So if that pathway inspires you, go for it.
So maybe I'll share a little bit about how I managed maybe to reach the government side of things as well. So first things first, for those who don't have LinkedIn, you know, set up a LinkedIn account. I would highly recommend, if you don't have it, you know, do it today. You can even comment on, you know, ministers or ministries' posts and actually raise right awareness or comments if you're questioning them or you just want to ask a generic question. I think the second thing is, you know, on behalf of your universities, schools, maybe even on your own, starting things like a podcast, interviewing, you know, individuals from the government, sending them, of course, an email for an invitation, I think will be quite interesting. I think they're always looking to target the younger generation as well, so that we can, you know, better get involved. Another thing that I did, for example, was I actually, you know, in these meetup sessions, always targeted a mix. For example, I had somebody from the corporate organization, someone from government. And if, by the way, that person really likes the work that you're doing and you build a good relationship, they will always bring their other government friends onto these sessions. So you can always think about it that way. I think attending conferences, meetings is a great way as well. So everything now is online. But for example, in the Middle East, if you would like to, you know, easily attend, you know, government meetings, youth circles, I mean, they've made it available for everybody. It's all, you know, free. You can actually ask questions. And sometimes if they like you, they ask you to unmute yourselves, give feedback and comments. You can always, you know, later on send them an email and say, by the way, I really like this. You know, is it possible to connect on a different level with regard to that? So that's what I did. It's really all about networking and building relationships, to be honest. And that's what I would say. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Volunteering is so important, and taking that direct action is just as important and effective. So our question here, it's a bit of a long one and might have already been answered, but a summary would be nice. As movies like Cowspiracy and Seaspiracy have now shown, the major fight against climate change and ecosystem restoration is done on a much different and higher level than is beyond individual control. So what can be done to make a dent and strike on that level?
I mean, I think partially we did answer this around personal choices. I mean, at the end of the day, the consumer does have a lot of power, right? And many consumers together have even more. So I think the meat industry, the fisheries industry are certainly those who are coming under increased scrutiny. And just the fact that you brought up those two movies almost answers the question in a way. The profound impressions that those movies have made on our society and have actually had people question their choices shows that, you know, art, film, media can really make a big impact. Investigative journalism really make a big impact and change the way we act and the way we spend. And that is a very powerful avenue for change.
To answer this question, I mean, for whoever asked it, you know, you're absolutely right. It's not about individual action. I mean, there's so many things we don't have control of, which is true. And that's exactly why, you know, Sustainable Development Goal 17 is important. You know, it's all about partnerships. You know, you need the support of course, the corporates, the governments, and yourself. But if you do a little bit of change, it could be something as small as, you know, what we have mentioned throughout our panel discussion. I think that already is one step forward. But if you have more specific questions on exactly what it is that you want to achieve, you know, I'm sure that you can connect with both Lauren and myself, and we'll definitely answer the question via LinkedIn or email as well if you have a more specific question. That's what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. So we have our last question over here, and it is, I'm a mom working and I'm in my 30s, and this person has previously not had a background in sustainability, but would like to restart their career in sustainability. Any advice from our speakers? And this question was specifically for Lauren.
Sure, I think learn, network, and go for it. Those would be my pieces of advice in short. You know, take every opportunity like today, and I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for joining us, right? Take every opportunity you can to learn more about the issue. Absolutely network with those whose, you know, kinds of networks and jobs you want to be involved with, and go for it. I am sure that whatever career you've been working in nonstop, you have a number of incredible skills you can bring to the sustainability arena. I think as Simarna and I are two very different examples of sustainability professionals shows, this is an incredibly diverse field, right? You need people who understand finance, media, retail, governments, right? Policies, right? All of these kinds of skill sets are incredibly important. So whether you're, you know, a communicator or an accountant, there's space for you in the sustainability field. Learn, network, and go for it.
Is it okay if I also add on to that question? I know that it was, you know, targeted towards Lauren, but I actually didn't have any experience in sustainability, you know, before actually entering, and I'm only 23. So, you know, there's, of course, for me, a long, long way to go to learn a lot more from individuals as well. I actually conducted a thesis for my undergraduate degree on how 5-star hotel chains can be more sustainable. I actually interviewed general managers and, of course, individuals who are responsible for sustainability. In some cases, it was the HR department who actually understand, you know, what is going on within the departments. And I could actually find linkages and gaps as well. So from those gaps, if you come up with suggestions and recommendations, that on its own actually gives you a lot of opportunity because you might actually understand what is missing from a practical standpoint. So yes, you have to do a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of studies before you actually give the recommendations. But that's actually how I got my first consultancy role. Just by sharing that I finished this thesis, and it was actually with somebody I conducted a thesis with, and said that these are the recommendations you can take. So, you know, it is not that challenging. It is definitely easier to connect. And I think that you should definitely start with every little small step. Thank you.
Thank you all for that very great advice. And so before we close, I just wanted to say that if the room could come on camera and we could take a screenshot with the speakers all together. Thank you to our speakers and for the fantastic panel that they provided. I think they definitely outlined the urgency and the need for ecosystem restoration. Thank you to our audience for participating, and it seems like this topic is one that resonates very, very well, and we will definitely bring more webinars to inform you all on these topics. Thank you so much to KeyNote for the organization and help with the webinar series. If you need any more details, please visit our website, SpunkGo.com. And be tuned for our next webinar, June 25th, with the space head of a Kyrgyzstan space station. Thank you all and have a very great day.